The words hung in the dusty air of the gas station parking lot like a prayer waiting to be answered. A young mother, her voice cracking under the weight of desperation, stood before a weathered biker whose leather jacket told stories of 1,000 roads traveled. She had no idea that the man before her had once crossed finish lines with the world watching, that his hands had gripped handlebars at speeds most people only dreamed of, or that fate had placed him at this exact location at this exact moment for reasons neither of them could yet understand. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Nevada desert as Marcus Cole pulled his vintage motorcycle into the worn parking lot of Henderson's Gas and Diner, a roadside establishment that had seen better decades. The chrome of his bike caught the early light, throwing scattered reflections against the cracked asphalt like fragments of forgotten dreams. At 62 years old, Marcus moved with the deliberate patience of a man who had learned that life's most important moments rarely announce themselves with fanfare. His face bore the map of a life lived fully, lines etched by wind and sun, and the particular kind of focus that comes from spending 30 years racing motorcycles at the highest levels of professional competition. 3 national championships, 2 international titles, and a wall of trophies that his ex-wife had once joked needed its own zip code. But that was another lifetime ago, before the crash that ended his career, before the surgeries that rebuilt his shattered leg, before the quiet years of rebuilding himself into something new. Now Marcus spent his days riding the back roads of America, volunteering at veteran rehabilitation centers, and teaching young riders the discipline and respect that the road demanded. He had traded the roar of stadium crowds for the whisper of desert winds, and most days he considered it a fair exchange. The bell above the diner door chimed as he stepped inside, the familiar scent of coffee and bacon grease wrapping around him like an old friend's embrace. Henderson's was the kind of place where truckers knew the waitresses by name, where the pie was always fresh, and where stories were traded as freely as the coffee refills. Marcus had been stopping here for nearly a decade, ever since he discovered that Martha Henderson made the only eggs in 3 states worth driving out of the way for. Martha herself stood behind the counter, her silver hair pulled back in a practical bun, her apron bearing the evidence of a morning's honest work. Her face brightened when she saw him, the way it always did, and she was already reaching for his usual mug before he settled onto the worn leather stool. That's when Marcus noticed her. Sitting in the corner booth, a young woman clutched a sleeping child against her chest with the fierce protectiveness of a mother who had been running from something for too long. The boy couldn't have been more than 4 years old, his small face peaceful in sleep despite the tension that radiated from his mother's every movement. She was young, maybe late 20s, with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and worried days. Her clothes were clean but worn, and the single duffel bag beside her suggested she was carrying everything she owned. But it was her eyes that caught Marcus's attention. They held the particular kind of fear that comes not from physical danger, but from the crushing weight of uncertainty. He had seen that look before, in the faces of veterans returning from overseas, in the mirrors of hospital rooms during his own recovery. It was the look of someone fighting a battle that no one else could see. Martha leaned close as she poured his coffee, her voice dropping to a whisper. She explained that the woman had been there since before dawn, nursing a single cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. Her car had broken down on the highway, the engine giving out somewhere between here and wherever she was trying to go. She had walked nearly 3 miles in the dark, carrying her sleeping son until she found the diner's lights cutting through the desert night. Marcus listened without interrupting, his weathered hands wrapped around the warmth of his mug. He watched the young mother in the reflection of the window, saw the way she kept glancing toward the door as if expecting trouble to walk through at any moment, saw how her hand never stopped moving in small, soothing circles on her son's back, even as her own body remained rigid with tension. He asked Martha if she knew where the woman was trying to go. Martha shook her head, explaining that the young mother hadn't said much beyond ordering the coffee and asking if she could stay until the morning buses started running. But there were no buses that came through Henderson's anymore, not since the route had been canceled 2 years prior. Martha didn't have the heart to tell her. The breakfast rush began to filter in, truckers and local workers seeking fuel for the day ahead. Marcus ate his eggs slowly, his attention divided between the food and the woman in the corner. He noticed small details that others might have missed. The way she positioned herself with her back to the wall, maintaining a clear view of every entrance. The way she tensed each time a new customer walked in before forcing herself to relax. The careful way she rationed the crackers from the basket on her table, breaking them into small pieces and tucking them into her pocket, likely for her son when he woke. These were not the behaviors of a woman in casual distress. These were the survival instincts of someone who had been forced to develop them through hard experience. Marcus finished his breakfast and paid his bill, adding enough extra to cover the woman's coffee and whatever breakfast she might want. He told Martha to make sure she ate something proper and to keep it quiet about who paid. Martha nodded with the understanding of a woman who had witnessed countless acts of quiet kindness in her diner over the years and knew better than to make a fuss about them. He was halfway to the door when the young mother stood abruptly, her movement startling her son awake. The boy blinked sleepily, confusion clouding his small features as his mother gathered their bag with hands that trembled slightly. She had seen Marcus heading outside, had noticed his motorcycle through the window, and desperation had apparently overcome whatever reservations had kept her silent until now. She caught up to him in the parking lot, her son now awake and watching the world with the wide-eyed curiosity unique to children. Her voice cracked when she spoke, the words tumbling out in a rush of barely contained emotion. She apologized for bothering him, explained that she wouldn't normally approach strangers, but she had overheard him talking to Martha about heading toward Phoenix, and she was trying to get there herself. Her sister lived there, the only family she had left, and if she could just get to Phoenix, everything would be okay. She could figure out the rest once she got there. Marcus studied her for a long moment, reading the truth in her trembling hands and desperate eyes. He asked about her car, and she explained that the mechanic in town had looked at it that morning. The engine was beyond simple repair, would cost more to fix than the car was worth, money she simply didn't have. She had been trying to figure out her options when she saw him. The boy tugged at his mother's sleeve, asking who the man was. His mother shushed him gently, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment at having to ask a stranger for help. Marcus crouched down to the boy's level, moving slowly so as not to frighten him, and introduced himself. He asked the boy's name, and the child responded with the innocent confidence that only the very young possess. His name was Danny, and he was 4 3/4, which was practically 5. And did the man know that his motorcycle was really shiny? Marcus couldn't help but smile. He told Danny that he did indeed know about the shininess, that he spent quite a bit of time making sure it stayed that way. Danny nodded solemnly, as if this was important information that required proper consideration. Standing up, Marcus looked at the mother again. He could see the internal battle playing across her face, the war between protecting her child and the practical reality of her situation. Getting on a motorcycle with a stranger wasn't safe, wasn't smart, wasn't the kind of thing a responsible mother did. But staying here with no car, no money, and no options wasn't safe either. He made a decision. He told her that his name was Marcus Cole, that he had been riding motorcycles for over 40 years, and that he had never once had a passenger come to harm under his care. He explained that Phoenix was on his route anyway, that he had planned to stop there to visit a friend, and that the extra company might make the ride more interesting. He told her that he had a spare helmet in his saddlebag, and that Danny was small enough to ride safely between them if they took the journey slow. The woman's eyes filled with tears that she quickly blinked away. She introduced herself as Elena Vasquez, and she thanked him with a sincerity that made Marcus's chest tight. She promised she would find a way to repay him somehow, someday, whatever it took. Marcus waved off the promise. He told her that the road had a way of bringing people together when they needed each other most, and that he had learned long ago to trust those moments, rather than question them. He retrieved the spare helmet from his saddlebag, a smaller one he kept for exactly these kinds of circumstances, and helped Danny adjust the straps until it sat securely on his small head. Danny's face lit up with excitement, the worries of his young life momentarily forgotten in the thrill of the upcoming adventure. He asked if they would go fast, and Marcus assured him that they would go exactly as fast as was safe and not a mile per hour faster. Danny seemed to accept this as a reasonable compromise. Elena climbed onto the motorcycle behind Marcus, settling Danny between them where he could hold onto the tank bag and feel secure. Marcus could feel her tension, the rigid way she held herself, the death grip she maintained on the back of his jacket. He told her to relax, to breathe, to trust the machine and the road and the man guiding them both. It would be a long ride if she spent the whole time fighting against it. The engine roared to life, and Danny let out a delighted laugh that seemed to startle his mother. For just a moment, a smile crossed Elena's face, the first genuine expression of joy Marcus had seen from her. Then they were moving, pulling out of the parking lot and onto the highway that stretched toward Phoenix like a promise waiting to be kept. The desert unfolded around them in shades of gold and amber, the morning sun climbing higher as the miles disappeared beneath their wheels. Marcus kept the pace steady, mindful of his young passenger and the woman whose trust he had unexpectedly earned. He pointed out landmarks along the way, explaining them in terms Danny could understand. The rock formation that looked like a sleeping giant, the dried riverbed that filled with water during monsoon season, the distant mountains that seemed to change color with the shifting light. Danny absorbed it all with the wonder of a child seeing the world from a new perspective, asking questions in a voice that had to compete with the wind and the engine. His mother remained quiet, but Marcus could feel her slowly relaxing, her grip on his jacket loosening as the miles passed without incident. They stopped at a small roadside park to stretch their legs and use the facilities. Marcus bought sandwiches and drinks from a vending machine, waving off Elena's protests about the cost. Danny ran circles around a picnic table, burning off the energy that had built up during the ride, while his mother watched with the vigilant attention of someone who had learned never to let her guard down completely. It was during this break that Marcus's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and saw a name that made his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. He excused himself and walked a short distance away to take the call, his voice too low for Elena to hear. When he returned, something in his demeanor had shifted. The easy warmth remained, but underneath it, Elena could sense a new layer of purpose, a sharpening of focus that hadn't been there before. He didn't explain the call, and she didn't ask. They both had their secrets, their reasons for being on this road at this particular moment, and some things didn't need to be spoken aloud. The afternoon stretched on as they continued toward Phoenix. The landscape changed gradually, desert giving way to the first hints of civilization, scattered buildings and distant highways converging toward the sprawling metropolis ahead. Danny had fallen asleep against his mother's chest, lulled by the rhythm of the road and the warmth of the afternoon sun. Elena spoke then, her voice barely audible above the engine. She thanked Marcus again, but this time there was something more in her words, a depth of gratitude that went beyond simple transportation. She told him that he had no idea what this meant to her, what he was saving her from by helping her reach her sister. She didn't elaborate, and Marcus didn't press. But he understood. He had spent too many years reading people not to recognize the signs. Something had driven Elena to flee with nothing but a bag and her son, something serious enough to make her walk 3 miles through the desert night carrying a sleeping child. Whatever waited in Phoenix wasn't just family, it was safety. It was a chance to start over. He told her that everyone deserved a second chance, that the road was full of people running toward something and away from something else, and that there was no shame in either direction. What mattered was the courage to keep moving, to keep hoping, to keep believing that the next mile might bring something better than the last. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when the Phoenix skyline came into view, a forest of glass and steel rising from the desert floor. Danny woke with perfect timing, his sleepy eyes widening at the sight of so many buildings clustered together. He had never seen a city this big, he told them, his voice filled with awe. Elena provided directions to her sister's neighborhood, a modest community on the eastern edge of the city, where small houses sat on carefully maintained lots, and children played in sprinkler-soaked front yards. The address led them to a single-story home with a yellow door and a garden of desert flowers, the kind of place that spoke of stability and care. Before Marcus could bring the motorcycle to a complete stop, the yellow door flew open and a woman came running out. She was older than Elena, with the same dark hair and the same shape to her eyes, and she was crying before she even reached them. The sisters embraced with the fierce desperation of people who had feared they might never see each other again, Danny sandwiched happily between them. Marcus hung back, giving them their moment. He had done what needed to be done, delivered them safely to their destination, and now his part in their story was complete. He began checking his motorcycle, preparing to continue on his own journey, when Elena broke away from her sister and approached him. Her eyes were red, but her voice was steady as she thanked him one final time. She told him that he had given her more than a ride, that he had given her hope when she had nearly lost it completely. She said she would never forget him, never forget what he had done for her and Danny, and that she would spend the rest of her life trying to pay forward the kindness he had shown them. Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn business card, the edges soft from years in his pocket. He told her that if she ever needed anything, if she ever found herself in trouble again, she should call the number on that card. Day or night, someone would answer, and someone would help. Elena looked at the card, her brow furrowing as she read the name and title printed there. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with sudden recognition. She knew that name. Everyone who had ever watched motorcycle racing knew that name. He was the Marcus Cole, the three-time national champion, the legend who had walked away from the sport after the crash that should have killed him. Marcus shrugged, a hint of his younger self's mischief dancing in his eyes. He told her that he was just a man with a motorcycle and some free time on his hands, nothing more and nothing less. Then he climbed back onto his bike, gave Danny a final wave, and pulled away from the curb. Elena watched until he disappeared around the corner, the sound of his engine fading into the symphony of the city. She looked down at the card in her hand, then at her sister, then at her son, who was already chattering excitedly about the adventure they had just had. For the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel. Stories like this one, where ordinary moments reveal extraordinary people, happen every single day. But most of them go unwitnessed, unknown, untold. By subscribing, you become part of a community that believes in sharing these moments, these reminders that kindness still exists, that heroes still walk among us wearing leather jackets and riding vintage motorcycles. Hit that subscribe button because the next story might be even more powerful than this one. 3 weeks had passed since Marcus Cole left Elena and Danny at the Yellow Door in Phoenix. The desert sun continued its endless cycle across the Nevada sky, and Henderson's Gas and Diner continued to serve coffee and conversation to the steady stream of travelers who found their way to its doors. Martha Henderson continued to remember the quiet generosity of the man who had helped a stranger, occasionally sharing the story with customers who seemed like they needed to hear it. Marcus himself had returned to his usual routine, riding the back roads, visiting the veteran centers where he volunteered, teaching the young riders who sought his expertise. He didn't think much about Elena or Danny, not because he didn't care, but because he had learned long ago that some seeds were planted and then left to grow on their own. His part in their story had been brief but complete, a single chapter in a book that would continue being written long after he was gone. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. It was a Thursday evening when Marcus arrived at the Desert Valley Veteran Rehabilitation Center, a sprawling complex on the outskirts of Las Vegas that served as home and hope for veterans struggling to find their place in the civilian world. Marcus had been volunteering here for nearly 8 years, teaching motorcycle maintenance and repair to residents who found peace in the methodical work of caring for machines. The program had started small, just Marcus and a donated bike in a borrowed garage, but it had grown into something significant. Now they had a fully equipped workshop, a fleet of teaching vehicles, and a waiting list of residents eager to participate. The work gave the veterans something to focus on, something to build with their hands, and the sense of accomplishment that came from transforming a pile of parts into a functioning motorcycle was therapy that no amount of talking could replicate. Tonight's session was with a new group, 6 men and 2 women who had just been approved for the program. Marcus walked them through the basics, explained the philosophy behind the work, and watched their faces as he spoke. Some were skeptical, some were eager, and some wore the blank expressions of people who had stopped expecting anything good to happen to them. One man in particular caught Marcus's attention. He was younger than the others, maybe mid-30s, with the muscular build of someone who had once been in peak physical condition, but was now running to seed. His name was Trevor, and he watched Marcus with an intensity that bordered on unsettling. There was recognition in his eyes, the kind that came from knowing exactly who Marcus was and what he had once been. After the session, Trevor approached him. He asked if Marcus remembered a race in Alabama nearly 15 years ago, a regional competition that had served as a qualifier for the national circuit. Marcus nodded slowly, the memory surfacing through the layers of time. It had been a difficult race, made more so by the weather that had turned the track into a treacherous ribbon of mud and standing water. Trevor told him that he had been there that day, a young rider competing in his first professional event. He had crashed hard in the third lap, his bike spinning out of control on a patch of oil that someone had missed during the pre-race inspection. He would have been hit by the riders behind him, would have been seriously hurt or worse if Marcus hadn't made an impossible maneuver to shield him while the safety crew responded. Marcus remembered now. The kid on the ground, the split-second decision, the way his own bike had screamed in protest as he forced it into a position that defied physics and common sense. He had taken a hit himself, a glancing blow from another rider who couldn't avoid him in time, but the kid had been protected. The race officials had praised his quick thinking. The other riders had bought him drinks that night, and then he had moved on to the next race, the next challenge, and the incident had faded into the vast library of moments that made up a lifetime of competition. Trevor's voice cracked as he continued. He said that day had changed the course of his life, not just because Marcus had saved him from injury, but because of what happened afterward. Marcus had come to the hospital where Trevor was being checked out, had sat with him while the doctors ran their tests, and had told him that crashing was part of racing, that the measure of a rider wasn't how many times he fell, but how many times he got back up. Those words had stayed with Trevor through everything that followed. Through his military service, through 3 deployments to places whose names he still couldn't speak without his voice catching, through the things he had seen and done that visited him in his sleep. When he had been at his lowest, when the darkness had seemed complete and permanent, he had remembered a stranger in a hospital room telling him that falling didn't define him. Rising did. Marcus listened without interrupting, his weathered face betraying nothing of the emotions stirring beneath the surface. When Trevor finished, Marcus reached out and placed a hand on the younger man's shoulder. He told him that he was glad the words had helped, that he wished he could claim some profound wisdom behind them. But the truth was simpler. He had just said what he believed, what he still believed, and sometimes that was enough. Trevor asked if he could help with the program, if he could be more than just a participant. He said he wanted to pass on what he was learning, to be for someone else what Marcus had been for him that day in Alabama. Marcus studied him for a long moment, reading the sincerity in his eyes, and then nodded. He could always use another pair of hands, especially hands attached to someone who understood what these veterans were going through. That night, as Marcus rode back to his modest home on the edge of the desert, he thought about the strange ways that life connected people across time and distance. A moment of instinct 15 years ago, a decision made in a fraction of a second, had rippled outward in ways he could never have predicted. It was humbling in a way, to realize that even our smallest actions might carry weight we never knew about. His phone buzzed with a text message. He pulled over to check it, squinting at the screen in the darkness. It was from Elena, the first time she had contacted him since Phoenix. The message was brief but significant. She wanted him to know that she and Danny were doing well. Her sister had helped her find a job, and Danny had started at a new school where he was already making friends. They had an apartment now, small but clean, with a window that caught the morning sun. She ended the message with a simple thank you, followed by a promise that she would call soon to tell him more. Marcus smiled and typed a brief response, then continued on his way. The stars were bright overhead, the desert silent except for the sound of his engine, and for a moment, everything felt exactly as it should be. The following week brought changes that Marcus hadn't anticipated. The Veteran Center received a substantial donation from an anonymous benefactor, enough to expand the motorcycle program and hire a part-time coordinator. The center's director, a pragmatic woman named Dr. Rachel Torres, asked Marcus if he knew anything about it. He truthfully told her that he didn't, but privately he wondered if word of the program had spread further than he realized. Trevor threw himself into the work with the dedication of a man who had finally found his purpose. He arrived early, stayed late, and showed a natural talent for connecting with the other veterans that Marcus found both impressive and moving. The younger man had a gift for meeting people where they were, for understanding their struggles without judgment, and for helping them see possibilities they had stopped believing in. The two men developed an easy rhythm in the workshop, their different styles complementing each other in ways that benefited everyone. Marcus provided the technical expertise and the quiet authority of decades of experience. Trevor provided the energy and the empathy of someone still close enough to his own struggles to remember exactly how they felt. One afternoon, while they were working on a particularly stubborn carburetor, Trevor asked Marcus about the crash that had ended his racing career. It was a question most people avoided, either out of politeness or fear of touching a sensitive subject, but Trevor asked it directly, without apology. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his hands continuing their work even as his mind traveled back to that day. He told Trevor that it had been a championship race, the final event of the season, with everything on the line. He had been leading by a comfortable margin when something failed in his front suspension, a flaw that the best mechanics in the world had missed during their inspections. The bike had gone down hard, sliding across the track at over 100 miles per hour, and Marcus had gone with it. He described waking up in the hospital with no memory of the crash itself, only the information that others provided. His leg had been shattered in multiple places, his pelvis cracked, his shoulder dislocated. The doctors had been cautiously optimistic about his recovery, but they had been very clear that racing professionally was no longer a possibility. The damage was too extensive, the risk too great. Trevor asked how he had handled it, losing something that had defined his entire life. Marcus considered the question carefully before answering. He said that at first he hadn't handled it well at all. There had been dark days, weeks when he struggled to find a reason to get out of bed, months when he wondered what the point of anything was if he couldn't do the one thing he had always been meant to do. But slowly, painfully, he had begun to realize that who he was had never really been about the racing. It had been about the discipline, the dedication, the pursuit of excellence, the relationships built along the way. Those things hadn't been taken from him. They had just been waiting for him to find new ways to express them. The motorcycle program at the Veteran Center had started as therapy for himself, Marcus admitted. He had needed something to do with his hands, something that connected him to the life he had lost. But it had become something more, something that gave him purpose and meaning in ways that winning championships never had, helping others find their way back from darkness, watching them discover their own strength. That was a different kind of victory, but a victory nonetheless. Trevor nodded slowly, absorbing the wisdom in Marcus's words. He said that he was beginning to understand that himself, that the things that broke us could also be the things that remade us into something better if we let them. Marcus looked at the younger man and saw the change already taking place, the gradual transformation from wounded veteran to healing helper. He told Trevor that it was a journey that never really ended, that healing wasn't a destination but a direction, and that the best any of us could do was keep moving forward, 1 mile at a time. The carburetor finally yielded to their combined efforts, the problem revealed and resolved. They stepped back to admire their work, two men from different generations connected by chrome and leather and the universal language of machinery. Outside the workshop window, the desert sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Marcus's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and saw Elena's name, finally making good on her promise to call. He excused himself and stepped outside to take it, leaving Trevor to begin cleaning up the workshop. Elena's voice was warm, but worried when she answered. She thanked him again for answering, apologized for calling during what was probably his work time, and then paused in a way that told Marcus something was wrong. He asked her what had happened, his voice calm but alert. Elena took a deep breath and explained. Someone had been watching her apartment building. She had noticed him 3 days ago. A man in a dark car who seemed to have no purpose other than sitting there for hours at a time. At first, she had told herself she was being paranoid, that the fears of her past were making her see threats where none existed. But this morning, she had found a note on her car windshield. Just 2 words. Found you. Marcus listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening with each detail. When Elena finished, he asked her if she had gone to the police. She had, she said, but they couldn't do much based on a note and a parked car. They had taken a report, promised to increase patrols in her area, but she could tell they didn't consider it a priority. She asked Marcus what she should do. Her voice cracked on the question, the fear she had been holding at bay finally breaking through. She said she couldn't run again, not when Danny had finally started to settle, to feel safe, to believe that they had found a home. But she couldn't ignore the threat either, couldn't pretend that the shadow from her past hadn't finally caught up with her. Marcus told her to stay calm, to keep her routines as normal as possible, and to document everything. He told her he knew people in Phoenix, people who could help in ways the police couldn't, and that he would make some calls. Most importantly, he told her that she was not alone in this, that she had reached out for help once before and it had been given, and that it would be given again. Elena's voice steadied as she listened to him. She thanked him, not just for the practical advice but for the simple act of believing her, of taking her fear seriously when it would have been so easy to dismiss it as overreaction. Marcus ended the call with a promise to check in the next day and walked back into the workshop. Trevor looked up from his cleaning, reading something in Marcus's expression that prompted him to ask if everything was okay. Marcus considered how much to share. Then he remembered the conversation they had just had, about healing and helping, and the way our lives intersected in unexpected ways. He told Trevor about Elena and Danny, about the ride from Henderson's to Phoenix, and about the call he had just received. Trevor listened with growing intensity. When Marcus finished, Trevor asked what the plan was. He said it in a way that made clear he intended to be part of whatever happened next, that he wasn't asking out of curiosity, but out of a desire to help. Marcus looked at him for a long moment, seeing not just the man Trevor was now, but the man he was becoming. He told Trevor that the plan was still forming, but that it would involve calling in some old favors, reaching out to some people whose abilities went beyond the ordinary, and making sure that Elena and Danny never had to run again. Trevor nodded once, firmly. He said to count him in. The Brotherhood of Chrome, as they called themselves, had started as a loose affiliation of retired racers, veterans, and law enforcement officers who shared a love of motorcycles and a commitment to helping those who couldn't help themselves. Over the years, they had evolved into something more organized, a network of skilled individuals who could be mobilized when the situation called for intervention that fell outside the scope of traditional authorities. Marcus had been one of the founding members, though he rarely invoked the connection these days. The Brotherhood operated quietly, preferring to avoid attention, and their effectiveness depended on their ability to move without being noticed. But when Elena's situation required resources beyond what one man could provide, Marcus knew exactly who to call. The first call went to Jackson Reeves, a former FBI agent who had spent 20 years tracking dangerous individuals across the country before retiring to Arizona. Jackson was methodical, analytical, and had access to information networks that most people didn't know existed. He agreed to look into Elena's past to find out who might be watching her and why. The second call went to Maria Santos, a former state trooper who now ran a private security firm in Phoenix. Maria was direct, competent, and fiercely protective of anyone she decided deserved her protection. She agreed to put eyes on Elena's apartment, discreetly, and to ensure that whoever was watching Elena was in turn being watched themselves. The third call went to a man known simply as Preacher, a Vietnam veteran and former biker club president who had dedicated his later years to helping people escape dangerous domestic situations. Preacher had connections that crossed every line imaginable, from law enforcement to legal aid to the kind of people who could make problems disappear without violence. He agreed to put Elena in touch with resources that could help her build a new life, truly new, with proper protections in place. Within 24 hours, the Brotherhood was in motion. Jackson's investigation revealed what Marcus had suspected from the beginning. Elena had fled from a relationship with a man named Victor Reyes, a controlling individual with enough money and connections to make her life extremely difficult. He had never been charged with anything serious, but the pattern was clear in the records Jackson uncovered. Previous partners who had tried to leave and failed. Restraining orders that seemed to have no effect. A history of using surveillance and intimidation to maintain his grip on people who wanted to be free of him. Victor was smart enough to stay just inside the lines of legality, to make his threats feel impossible to prove, to create situations where his victims appeared unstable while he appeared reasonable. The police couldn't help because he never technically broke the law. Lawyers couldn't help because he had better lawyers. Elena had realized that her only option was to disappear, to run far enough and fast enough that he would give up the pursuit. But Victor Reyes was not the giving up type. Maria's surveillance team identified the man watching Elena's apartment as a private investigator with a reputation for taking jobs that others refused. He worked for Victor, that much was clear, and his presence meant that Victor knew exactly where Elena was. It was only a matter of time before the situation escalated. Marcus shared this information with Elena during a video call that also included her sister, whose name was Carmen. The sisters sat close together, drawing strength from each other's presence, while Danny played quietly in the background with a toy truck that Marcus had sent him through the mail. Elena absorbed the information with a calm that surprised Marcus until he realized it wasn't calm at all. It was resignation, the acceptance of someone who had known all along that this moment would come but had allowed herself to hope otherwise. She asked what her options were, her voice steady even as her hands trembled. Marcus laid them out clearly. She could run again, try to disappear somewhere new, but Victor had proven that he had the resources to find her eventually. She could try to fight him legally, but the legal system had already shown its limitations in dealing with people like Victor. Or she could let the Brotherhood help her in ways that went beyond running and beyond the courts. Elena asked what that meant exactly. Marcus told her that it meant confronting Victor directly, not with violence but with exposure. Men like Victor depended on their image, on the carefully constructed persona of respectability that allowed them to operate without consequence. Strip away that image, reveal the truth to the people whose opinions Victor valued, and suddenly his power evaporated. The Brotherhood had done this before. They had assembled evidence, coordinated with journalists and investigators, and ensured that the truth came to light in ways that couldn't be ignored or suppressed. It was risky, because men like Victor often responded to exposure with escalation. But it was also effective because the one thing Victor couldn't survive was the world seeing him as he truly was. Elena was silent for a long moment, her eyes distant as she considered the implications. Then she looked at Carmen, who nodded with fierce determination. Finally, she looked back at the screen, at Marcus's weathered face waiting patiently for her decision. She said yes. She said she was tired of running, tired of looking over her shoulder, tired of living in fear. If there was a chance to end this, to truly end it, then she wanted to take it. For herself. For Danny. For everyone Victor might target after her if he wasn't stopped. Marcus nodded, a hint of a smile crossing his face. He told her she was braver than she knew, and that the Brotherhood would be in touch with next steps. He reminded her to document everything, to stay vigilant, and to call immediately if anything changed. Then he ended the call and began making more calls, setting the machinery of the Brotherhood into motion. The next few days were a flurry of activity. Jackson continued his investigation, digging deeper into Victor's background and finding patterns that painted a damning picture. Maria's team maintained their surveillance, building a record of the private investigators' activities that would be useful later. Preacher reached out to organizations that specialized in protecting people in Elena's situation, establishing a safety network that would be in place regardless of how the confrontation with Victor unfolded. Trevor, true to his word, threw himself into helping wherever he could. He made trips to Phoenix to check on Elena and Danny in person, his military training making him an effective and unobtrusive guardian. He coordinated with Maria's team, lending his skills to their surveillance efforts. And he spent hours talking with Elena, helping her process the fear and stress of the situation, becoming the supportive presence she desperately needed. Marcus watched all of this unfold with a mixture of pride and concern. The plan was coming together, but plans had a way of encountering unexpected obstacles. Victor Reyes was dangerous precisely because he was intelligent and resourceful, and underestimating him could have serious consequences. It was during one of these anxious waiting periods that Marcus received an unexpected visitor at the Veterans Center. A woman in her 50s, elegantly dressed but with tired eyes, asked to speak with him privately. She introduced herself as Diane Reyes, Victor's mother. Marcus's first instinct was suspicion, but something in the woman's demeanor gave him pause. She didn't carry herself like an enemy. She carried herself like someone bearing a heavy burden, someone seeking help rather than offering threats. They sat in his small office, the door closed against curious ears, and Diane told him her story. She knew what her son had become, had watched him transform over the years from a difficult child into a controlling adult. She had tried to intervene, to get him help, to make him see the damage he was causing, but Victor had long since stopped listening to her. He had stopped listening to anyone who didn't tell him exactly what he wanted to hear. She had learned about Elena through her own sources, had been secretly tracking the situation from afar. When she discovered that someone was organizing to confront Victor, she had followed the trail until it led her here, to Marcus and the Brotherhood. She had come not to warn Victor, but to help. Marcus listened without interrupting, his mind racing through the implications. If Diane was genuine, her assistance could be invaluable. She had access to Victor's inner circle, knowledge of his secrets, and the credibility that came from being family. But if she wasn't genuine, if this was some kind of trap orchestrated by Victor himself, then the entire operation could be compromised. He asked her why. Why betray her own son? Why risk everything to help a woman she had never met? Diane's eyes filled with tears she didn't try to hide. She told him that she had failed Victor as a mother, had been too absent during his formative years, too focused on her own life to notice the warning signs. She couldn't change the past, couldn't undo the damage that had been done. But she could try to prevent more damage in the future. She could try to protect Elena and Danny and whoever else might fall into Victor's orbit. More than that, she said, she wanted to save Victor from himself. Not from consequences, he deserved those, but from becoming something even worse. If he wasn't stopped now, if he wasn't forced to confront what he had become, then his trajectory led nowhere good. For anyone. Marcus studied her for a long time, reading her face, her body language, the subtle signs that revealed truth or deception. Finally, he made a decision. He told her that he would accept her help provisionally, but that she would need to prove her sincerity through actions rather than words. He told her that the Brotherhood had ways of verifying information and that any attempt at deception would be discovered. Diane nodded, accepting the terms without argument. She asked what he needed her to do. Marcus told her that for now, he needed her to be his eyes inside Victor's world. He needed to know Victor's plans, his resources, his vulnerabilities. He needed to know when Victor intended to make his move against Elena, and he needed to know it in advance. Diane agreed. She said she would do whatever it took to make things right, or as right as they could be given everything that had happened. Then she left, and Marcus sat alone in his office, wondering if he had just acquired a powerful ally or walked into a carefully laid trap. I need to pause here and share something with you, something important. If this story has touched you, if Elena's courage and Marcus's compassion have reminded you that kindness still exists in this world, then please take a moment to leave a comment below. Write these words: "Heroes still ride among us." Let me know that you believe as I do, that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they choose to act instead of look away. Your comment means more than you know. The confrontation came sooner than anyone expected. Victor Reyes arrived in Phoenix on a Wednesday evening, driving a rented luxury sedan that announced his presence to anyone paying attention. He checked into the finest hotel in the city, made reservations at an exclusive restaurant, and behaved in every way like a man with nothing to hide and nothing to fear. Maria's team tracked his movements from the moment he crossed the city limits. They watched him meet with his private investigator, watched him make phone calls that Jackson's contacts managed to intercept, watched him prepare for what he clearly believed would be an easy victory. Victor was confident, almost arrogant, and that confidence would prove to be his greatest weakness. The Brotherhood gathered in Phoenix the following day. Marcus rode in from Las Vegas, Trevor by his side. Jackson flew in from his home in Tucson. Preacher drove up from his ranch near the border, bringing with him 3 other members whose specific skills would prove essential. Maria coordinated the assembly, ensuring that everyone knew their role and their position. They met at a neutral location, a warehouse on the outskirts of the city that one of the Brotherhood members owned. The space was clean and well lit, equipped with everything they needed to plan and execute their operation. Maps of the city covered one wall. Photographs of Victor and his known associates covered another. A timeline of events stretched across a whiteboard, updated constantly as new information came in. Marcus outlined the plan. The goal was not to confront Victor physically, but to expose him publicly in a way that would destroy his carefully maintained reputation. They had assembled evidence of his pattern of behavior, testimony from previous victims who had agreed to come forward, financial records that showed how he used his resources to intimidate and control. All of this would be delivered simultaneously to journalists, law enforcement agencies, and Victor's business associates, creating a wave of exposure that he couldn't suppress or spin. But timing was everything. They needed Victor to make a move against Elena first, to provide clear evidence of his intentions that would contextualize everything else. Without that active demonstration of his nature, he could claim that the other evidence was fabricated, that he was the victim of a conspiracy, that Elena was an unstable ex-partner making false accusations. The wait was agonizing. Elena remained in her apartment, guarded constantly but invisibly, living her life as normally as possible while knowing that the storm was about to break. Danny sensed something was wrong, as children often do, but Elena maintained the pretense of normalcy for his sake, reading him stories at bedtime, helping him with his letters, being the mother he deserved even in the midst of chaos. Victor made his move on Friday night. He appeared at Elena's apartment building without warning, having somehow evaded Maria's surveillance team long enough to reach the lobby undetected. The building's security footage showed him speaking to the doorman, showing identification, claiming to be Elena's brother-in-law with urgent news about their sister. The doorman, unaware of the situation, let him up. Elena heard the knock on her door and felt her heart stop. She looked through the peephole and saw Victor standing in the hallway, his face arranged in an expression of concern that she knew was entirely false. Danny was already asleep in his room, and the safe room that the Brotherhood had prepared was 3 steps behind her. She didn't panic. She had been trained for this moment, had rehearsed it countless times in her mind. She activated the silent alarm that Maria had installed, sending an immediate alert to every member of the Brotherhood. She backed away from the door toward the safe room, and she began recording on her phone, capturing everything for evidence. Victor knocked again, calling her name in a voice that oozed false warmth. He said he just wanted to talk, that he had come all this way to work things out, that surely they could resolve their differences like adults. The words were calculated to sound reasonable to anyone who might overhear, establishing a narrative of reconciliation that he could use later if needed. Elena reached the safe room and sealed herself inside with Danny, who had woken at the commotion and was now clutching her hand with frightened confusion. She spoke to him quietly, calmly, telling him that everything was okay, that some friends were coming to help, that he just needed to stay quiet and brave for a little while. Outside the apartment, Victor's patience evaporated. The reasonable tone disappeared, replaced by something harder, colder. He demanded that Elena open the door, that she stop playing games, that she remember who she was dealing with. The hallway security camera captured every word, every gesture, every escalation. The Brotherhood arrived 7 minutes after the alert. Marcus came through the building's back entrance, moving with a speed that belied his age. Trevor came through the front, his military training evident in every deliberate movement. Maria and her team surrounded the building, blocking every possible exit. Jackson coordinated from a vehicle parked across the street, monitoring communications and directing resources. Victor was still at Elena's door when Marcus appeared at the end of the hallway. Their eyes met across the distance, and something shifted in Victor's expression. Recognition, perhaps, or the first stirring of fear. He had expected Elena to be alone, vulnerable, easy to intimidate into compliance. He had not expected to find himself face to face with a legend. Marcus walked toward him slowly, deliberately, his posture conveying controlled strength without aggression. He stopped at a distance that was close enough to talk but far enough to be non-threatening. His voice was calm when he spoke, the kind of calm that came from absolute certainty. He told Victor that the situation had changed. He explained that there were cameras recording everything, that there were witnesses in every direction, that the evidence of Victor's behavior was already being distributed to people who would be very interested in seeing it. He told Victor that the game was over, that running was futile, that the only choice left was how the ending would look. Victor's face cycled through emotions: anger, confusion, calculation, fear. He was a man who had always been in control, who had always been able to manipulate situations to his advantage, and the sudden loss of that control left him unbalanced. He tried to bluster, to threaten, to claim that Marcus had no idea who he was dealing with. Marcus let him finish, then spoke again. He listed Victor's previous victims by name, described his patterns of behavior in detail, quoted from financial documents that Victor had believed were private. He made clear, in terms that left no room for misunderstanding, exactly how much the Brotherhood knew and exactly how much they were prepared to reveal. Then he gave Victor a choice. He could leave now, peacefully, and face the consequences of his actions through legal channels. Or he could escalate and face those same consequences plus additional charges that the Brotherhood was prepared to document in real time. The silence stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then Victor's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him as he recognized the completeness of his defeat. He had spent years building an image, cultivating relationships, constructing the persona of a respectable businessman. All of that was about to crumble, regardless of what he did next. The question was whether he would make it worse or accept the inevitable. He chose acceptance. He turned and walked toward the elevator, his steps unsteady, his posture broken. Trevor escorted him out of the building and into the waiting arms of police officers who Maria had called the moment the situation was contained. The charges were minor for now, but they would grow as more evidence came to light and more victims found the courage to come forward. Marcus knocked gently on the safe room door and spoke Elena's name. Her voice trembled when she answered, asking if it was really over. He told her it was, that Victor was gone, that she and Danny were safe. The lock clicked, the door opened, and Elena emerged with Danny in her arms, her face streaked with tears of relief. She thanked him, the words inadequate for the emotion behind them. Marcus accepted the thanks but deflected the credit, telling her that she had been the brave one, that she had made the call for help not once but twice, that she had trusted strangers when trust seemed impossible. Her courage had made everything else possible. Danny, still processing the confusion of the night, looked up at Marcus with wide eyes. He asked if the bad man was gone for good. Marcus crouched down to Danny's level, just as he had at the gas station weeks ago, and told him the truth. He said that the bad man was going to be held responsible for his choices, that people who hurt others eventually face consequences, and that Danny and his mother were going to be okay. Danny considered this seriously, then asked if Marcus would stay for breakfast. The question was so simple, so innocent, so perfectly timed that everyone within earshot had to smile despite the tension of the night. Marcus said he would stay for breakfast, and he meant it. The weeks following Victor's arrest brought changes that rippled outward like stones dropped in still water. The evidence that the Brotherhood had assembled proved even more damaging than expected, as media coverage attracted additional victims who had been waiting for someone to break the silence first. What began as one woman's story became a chorus of voices, each adding weight to the truth. Victor's business associates distanced themselves rapidly, eager to avoid the contamination of association. His social standing, so carefully cultivated, evaporated overnight. His lawyers fought hard, as expensive lawyers do, but the evidence was overwhelming, and the public tide had turned. He faced multiple charges across multiple jurisdictions, and the consensus among legal experts was that he would spend years answering for his actions. Diane Reyes testified against her own son, a decision that cost her dearly, but that she made without hesitation. She told the truth about what she had witnessed, what she had suspected, what she had been unable to prevent. Her testimony wasn't necessary for conviction, the other evidence was sufficient, but it added a dimension of tragedy that made the story resonate even more deeply. Elena began the process of rebuilding her life, this time on a foundation of genuine security. She enrolled in courses that would help her advance her career. She connected with support groups for survivors of controlling relationships. She made friends in her neighborhood, joined Danny's school parent association, and started to believe that she deserved the happiness she was finding. Danny flourished with the remarkable resilience of children. He made friends, earned good grades, developed a passion for building things that his mother encouraged by enrolling him in an after-school engineering program. He still asked about Marcus occasionally, wondering when the motorcycle man would visit again. Marcus returned to his life in Nevada, but something had shifted inside him. The experience with Elena and Danny had reminded him of why he had helped found the Brotherhood in the first place, the simple truth that people needed each other, that strength meant nothing if it wasn't used to protect the vulnerable, that redemption was always possible for those willing to choose it. He expanded the motorcycle program at the Veteran Center, bringing in more volunteers and serving more residents. Trevor became his right hand, taking on increasing responsibility as his skills and confidence grew. The program gained recognition, received additional funding, and became a model that other facilities sought to replicate. One evening, several months after the confrontation in Phoenix, Marcus was working late in the workshop when Trevor approached him with an unusual expression. He told Marcus that there was someone outside asking to see him, someone who had ridden a long way to deliver a message in person. Marcus stepped outside into the cool desert evening and found Elena standing beside a motorcycle, Danny perched on the seat with a helmet that was almost too big for him, but that he wore with obvious pride. Beside her stood Carmen, and beside Carmen stood a man Marcus didn't recognize, but who looked at Elena with an affection that was impossible to miss. Elena's smile was brighter than he had ever seen it. She introduced the man as David, someone she had met through one of the support groups, someone who understood her past and accepted her present. They were taking things slowly, she said, but for the first time in years, she was allowing herself to imagine a future. She hadn't come just to share good news, though. She had come to offer something in return for everything Marcus had done. She explained that she had been saving money, had been planning this for months, and now she was ready to make it happen. She handed him an envelope. Inside was a check, enough to fund the veteran motorcycle program for an entire year, made out to the center with a memo that read simply, "For Marcus, who gave a stranger a ride." Marcus tried to protest, to tell her that the money was too much, that she should keep it for Danny's future, that he hadn't helped her expecting anything in return. But Elena cut him off with a gentle but firm voice. She told him that she had learned something important through everything that had happened. She had learned that kindness was a current, not a transaction. It flowed in one direction until it gathered enough momentum to flow back, and then it kept flowing, reaching people and places that no one could predict. Marcus had started a current when he gave her a ride from a dusty parking lot to a yellow door in Phoenix. Now that current was flowing back to him, and she wouldn't let him stop it. Danny climbed down from the motorcycle and ran to Marcus, wrapping his small arms around the man's waist in a hug that conveyed more than words could express. He said that his mom told him Marcus was a champion, that he used to win races in front of thousands of people, but Danny thought that helping people was way cooler than winning races. Marcus's throat tightened as he hugged the boy back. He told Danny that he thought so too, that it had taken him a long time to figure that out, but that Danny was clearly smarter than he had been at that age. The group went inside for coffee and conversation, catching up on the months that had passed and the changes that had come. Carmen shared news of a promotion at her job. David talked about his work with at-risk youth. Elena described her plans to eventually start a nonprofit helping other survivors rebuild their lives. As the evening wound down and farewells were exchanged, Elena pulled Marcus aside for one final word. She told him that he had changed her life, that he had changed Danny's life, and that the ripples of his kindness would continue spreading in ways neither of them could imagine. She told him that she would spend the rest of her life paying it forward, helping others the way he had helped her. Marcus looked at her for a long moment, seeing not the frightened woman from the gas station, but the strong, confident person she had become. He told her that she had always had that strength inside her, that he had just provided a ride while she did the hard work of becoming who she was meant to be. They embraced one last time, and then Elena and her family departed, their taillights disappearing into the desert darkness. Marcus stood watching until they were gone, then returned inside to find Trevor waiting with 2 cups of coffee and an expression of profound satisfaction. Trevor raised his cup in a toast. He said that days like this reminded him why they did what they did, why the Brotherhood existed, why the work mattered even when it was difficult. Marcus returned the toast. He said that every person they helped was proof that the world could be better, that kindness could triumph over cruelty, that courage could overcome fear. He said that as long as there were people willing to stop and offer help to strangers, there was hope. They drank their coffee in comfortable silence, two men from different generations united by shared purpose, surrounded by the motorcycles that had brought them together and the memories of all the rides that still lay ahead. 5 years passed in the way that time does, quickly when you look back and slowly when you live it. The world changed in countless ways, but some things remained constant. The desert still stretched golden under the Nevada sun. Henderson's Gas and Diner still served the best eggs in 3 states. And Marcus Cole still rode the back roads of America, still stopped to help strangers, still believed in the power of ordinary people to do extraordinary things. The veteran motorcycle program had grown beyond anything Marcus had imagined. What started as one man and a donated bike had become a nationwide initiative, with chapters in 30 states and a waiting list of veterans eager to participate. Trevor ran the main program now, having proven himself more than capable of carrying the torch. Marcus remained involved as a mentor and figurehead, but the day-to-day operations belonged to the next generation. The Brotherhood of Chrome had evolved as well. New members had joined as old ones stepped back, but the core mission remained unchanged. They still mobilized when the situation called for it, still protected those who couldn't protect themselves, still believed that there was no substitute for personal courage in service of others. Their methods had refined over time, their networks had expanded, but their values remained constant. Elena's nonprofit had launched successfully and now operated in 7 cities, providing support and resources to survivors of controlling relationships. She had written a book about her experience that had become an unexpected bestseller, bringing attention to an issue that too often remained hidden in shadow. She spoke at conferences, appeared on television, and worked tirelessly to help others find the courage she had once struggled to find herself. Danny had grown into a remarkable young man, smart and kind and determined to make a difference in the world. He had just been accepted to college with a full scholarship, planning to study engineering with a focus on developing technology to help people in crisis situations. He still remembered the motorcycle man who had given his mother a ride when she needed it most, and he still considered that moment the turning point that had made everything else possible. The anniversary of Elena's rescue had become an informal holiday for the extended family that had formed around that event. Each year, they gathered at Carmen's house in Phoenix, joined by friends and allies who had played their parts in the story. Each year, they shared food and conversation and memories, celebrating not just what they had survived, but what they had built afterward. This year's gathering was special. Marcus had announced that he would be retiring from active participation in the Brotherhood, stepping back to make room for younger members, while remaining available for consultation and wisdom. The decision had been difficult but necessary. His body reminded him daily of the years it had carried him, the crashes it had survived, the miles it had traveled. It was time to slow down, to enjoy the life he had built, to watch others carry forward the work he had started. The gathering was larger than usual, with Brotherhood members from across the country making the trip to honor their founder. Trevor gave a speech that brought tears to Marcus's eyes, thanking him for seeing potential in a broken veteran and giving him a chance to become something more. Elena gave a speech that brought tears to everyone's eyes, describing how a single act of kindness had changed the trajectory of her entire family's life. Danny gave a speech that brought hope to everyone's heart. He talked about the power of paying attention, of noticing when someone needs help and having the courage to offer it. He talked about his plans to design systems that would make it easier for people in crisis to connect with people who could help. He talked about carrying forward the legacy of kindness that Marcus had demonstrated, not because he felt obligated, but because he had seen firsthand how powerful it could be. Marcus listened to it all with a full heart and a peaceful mind. He had spent so many years chasing speed, chasing championships, chasing a definition of success that the world had handed him. But sitting here, surrounded by people whose lives he had touched, he understood that his greatest victories had never happened on a racetrack. They had happened in parking lots and diners and hallways, in moments when he chose to help instead of pass by, to engage instead of ignore, to treat strangers like they mattered because they did. The celebration continued late into the evening, stories being shared and laughter being heard and connections being renewed. As the night wound down and guests began to depart, Elena found Marcus sitting alone on Carmen's back porch, looking up at the stars that scattered across the desert sky. She sat down beside him without speaking, and for a long moment they simply existed together in comfortable silence. Then she asked him if he had any regrets, if there was anything he would have done differently if he could go back. Marcus considered the question carefully. He thought about the crash that had ended his racing career, the pain and loss and uncertainty that had followed. He thought about the years of rebuilding, the slow discovery of a new purpose, the gradual realization that who he was had never depended on what he could do. He thought about Elena and Danny, about Trevor and the veterans, about all the people whose paths had crossed his in ways that had changed them both. He told her that he had many regrets, because anyone who lived long enough accumulated them. But he didn't regret the choices that had brought him here, to this moment, to this porch, to this conversation. He didn't regret stopping that day at Henderson's, didn't regret offering a ride to a stranger, didn't regret any of the decisions that had followed from that simple act. He told her that life was built from such moments, small choices that accumulated into something larger, individual acts that combined into a legacy. He had spent the first half of his life thinking that victory meant being the fastest, the strongest, the most accomplished. He had spent the second half learning that true victory meant leaving the world a little better than you found it, one person at a time. Elena leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture of affection and gratitude that words couldn't capture. She told him that she would spend the rest of her life honoring what he had taught her, that she would pass it on to Danny and to everyone she helped, that the current of kindness he had started would keep flowing long after both of them were gone. Marcus smiled and wrapped an arm around her shoulders. He told her that was all any of us could do, all any of us could hope for. Plant seeds, start currents. Trust that the universe would carry them forward in ways we couldn't predict but could believe in. They sat together until the stars began to fade and the first light of dawn touched the eastern horizon. A new day was beginning, full of possibilities and challenges and opportunities for kindness. Marcus felt ready to face it, whatever it brought. He had been a champion once, in a world that measured victory in seconds and trophies. But he had become something more important in the years since. He had become proof that ordinary people could be heroes, that strength could be gentle, that the most meaningful races were the ones that never appeared on any scoreboard. The motorcycle waited in Carmen's driveway, chrome gleaming in the early morning light. There were still roads to travel, still strangers to meet, still moments when someone might need a ride and a kind word from someone who understood that we were all in this together. Marcus rose from the porch and stretched his aging muscles. He hugged Elena one more time, whispered words of love and encouragement, and walked to his bike. The engine roared to life with the familiar sound that had accompanied him through decades of living, and then he was rolling forward down the driveway, onto the street, toward wherever the road led next. Behind him, Elena watched until he disappeared around the corner, just as she had watched that first time in Phoenix when he had delivered her to safety and then ridden away into the unknown. This time she felt no fear, no uncertainty, no worry about what came next. She felt only gratitude, vast and deep and enduring. Gratitude for a stranger who stopped, gratitude for a ride that changed everything. Gratitude for the reminder that kindness was the most powerful force in the universe, available to everyone who chose to wield it. If you watched this far, it's because this story touched something in you. It's because you believe, as I do, that the world can be better when ordinary people choose to help each other. Leave a comment saying, "I watched this far," so I can get to know you and know who really likes the stories on this channel. And if this story moved you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. There's someone in your life right now who is struggling, who feels alone, who has forgotten that kindness exists. Maybe this story will remind them. Maybe you will remind them. Subscribe if you haven't already, because more stories like this one are coming. Stories of courage and compassion, of ordinary heroes and extraordinary moments, of the simple truth that we are all connected and that what we do for each other matters more than anything. The road stretches out before all of us, full of strangers who might need help, full of moments when we can choose to stop or pass by. What will you choose? Marcus Cole chose to stop, and a mother and son found safety. Trevor chose to stop and found purpose. Elena chose to stop running and found strength. The Brotherhood chose to stop injustice and found meaning. Now it's your turn. Somewhere out there right now, someone is standing in a dusty parking lot hoping that help will appear. Someone is carrying a child through the darkness, searching for lights that mean safety. Someone is wondering if kindness still exists, if anyone would notice if they disappeared, if there's any hope left in this world. Be the reason they believe again. Be the stranger who stops. Be the ride that changes everything. The engine is running. The road is waiting. Let's go.